Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. Welcome, everybody. Today on our Books Forward show, we do this every second Wednesday. We chat with books and authors, and we've been working with Books Forward for, I'm going to say 20 years or something. Yeah, we're all getting younger here. But today we're going to be chatting with author Ann Lowry, and she's going to talk about her novel called The Blue Trunk. And I encourage you to go to her website, annlowry.com. No E's in that Ann or Lowry. So annlowry.com. Her book came out yesterday, September 10th. And we're excited because this is a story that came from your family history and then became fictionalized. And we want to talk about why. But welcome. How are you, Ann?
I'm great. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about my book.
Oh, I am too. I am too, because this could have been a memoir, but it's interesting because you're doing two different eras, right, at the same time,
Right.
and had to have bring some fiction in there. And so let's talk about those choices. But before, do you want to give everyone just a little bit of an overview of the story without spoilers? Because it's out and
Sure.
people can get it.
And there's some spoilers in there, so I'll be careful. The book starts with a woman named Rachel, who's married to a politician, and her life pretty much revolves around being a political wife. And she's a little frustrated with that. And at the beginning of the book, she finds a scarf in his briefcase bag. And
Uh-oh.
of course assumes that he's having an affair. But it's an election cycle time, so she can't raise a fuss about that, so she needs a distraction. Her mother gives her a trunk, a blue trunk, a family heirloom, and so she sort of delves into the contents of it and starts doing research on this great great aunt that her mother told her was insane, because she wants to find out what happened to her. So that's the Rachel side of the story. As Rachel begins to explore what happened to her great great aunt and all the things she went through, Rachel begins to address some of the issues in her own life, which go beyond just finding the scarf. She's got a lot of other issues going on too. So there's Rachel's story, and then there's Marit's story. And Marit immigrated in the early 1900s. And so we follow Marit as she progresses through her life, and then ends up in the end. Well, I won't tell you the end of the story, but
No, no, no.
we follow her life too. And so it goes back and forth between the two time periods, roughly a century apart. But both stories are interesting, and then they're interwoven as they go. So
That's it. I love that you're doing it that way, but the actual trunk that's the story from your actual family, right?
that's right. I have the trunk, and
Wow.
I actually, my mother had it. And when my daughter was born, I said, "Oh, I want to name my daughter Marit because I like that name, even though I didn't know
Hmm.
anything about this great great aunt." And my mother said, "Oh no, you can't do that. She was insane." And so I didn't name my daughter Marit, and I named her Brienne. But for years, I was kind of fascinated by, what happened to Marit, and it kind of, in a way, almost haunted me a little bit. Every time I'd see that trunk, I'm like, where did she end up? So a few years ago, I started doing some genealogy research and signed
Hmm.
up for all the genealogy websites. And interestingly enough, I couldn't find anything about her. I found that she was born in Norway. I knew that. And I knew that she'd come to this country because I also had an autograph book that she'd signed in I think it was 1889, in
Oh,
Blair, Trempealeau, Wisconsin. And so I knew she was here, and she'd written this lovely poem in the autograph book, which I later tracked down to a poet, a British poet. But she seemed, if she was writing the autograph book, clearly she was here. So I lost track of her. I found a lot of information about my great great grandmother who immigrated with her, her sister, death certificate, marriage certificate, census records. So, and it's very hard to find information on people who were in asylums. So that's what I went to next. And what I found was that often people who are in asylums, they might have counted the number of people in an asylum in a census, but they didn't do individual names. And often these
oh,
people
wow.
weren't even considered basically human beings. And then, much to my surprise, as I was doing this research, I found a cemetery in my hometown, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, that was called the Old Orchard Cemetery, but it was next to the old asylum site. And it was, figuratively called Cemetery of the Unknown. And so I went and visited it, and all the graves were marked, most of them, there were a couple that had names on them, were marked unknown. And that's where the asylum patients were buried. And so, long story short, I realized that she probably ended up in the asylum and then probably died, and perhaps is in one of those unknown graves in Eau Claire,
Wow.
Wisconsin.
So they're not even treated as human,
No, they weren't.
not
They
even as
weren't.
livestock, even, in a way, when you
No.
think about how we've treated. And I wonder about this. I've seen some documentaries and I've seen, been through, we travel and we go and find out like here's an asylum, and it's freaky. There's like so many ghost stories too of, because I think they were tortured. Honestly, from what I've seen, I think there was a time like I actually, have a family that they're both passed away by now, a family friend, basically family. And his wife lost her short-term memory. So she would, she was a smoker and she would leave cigarettes burning around the house and things, but she had a heart issue, smoking. Um, but they wanted to institutionalize her because of her
Mhm.
memory, not because of her heart. And her husband stood up and said, "That's it. They actually moved and became expats in Mexico." And part of it was he wanted to take care of his wife until she passed away. And that's what he did. And he was like, just because she has short term memory doesn't mean we just, lock her away. It was weird because it wasn't that long ago. We're talking maybe the 80s, even.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did,
Well,
oh,
and it was interesting because the Immigration Act in the late 1870s didn't allow people who had mental illness to come to America. So when Mark
oh,
came here, she was likely sane, but women were frequently called, if they were disruptive in any way, hysterical. And the identity or the diagnosis of hysteria didn't actually leave the psychological profile or diagnoses until 1952. So women were still being called hysterical up until 1952. And if you look at the list of
wow.
characteristics or symptoms of hysteria, like being angry or being unable to do all your chores in a day, I mean, we would all be classified as hysterical. It would be
And
really
look at what
easy.
women were wearing back then, to appease the man. It's like,
Right.
well-bone corsets and like who wants to wear all that stuff? What we had to, and women were walking across the country with ox wagons and they didn't get to ride in the ox wagon.
Right. But it was really easy to institutionalize a woman until really quite a
Well,
few, not that long ago, a few centuries or a few decades ago. Um,
it's weird because we were also in some of those time frames also performing eugenics, right? And sterilizing women depending on where, who, what, and where. So, and if you had a child that you weren't supposed to have, they were nameless and they would take them. And it's the kind of similar parallel lines of all of this happening. In England, when we lived in there, I remember going to like a castle or something. And even in history, they were teaching this, like how women were called nags. If you said to your husband, "Hey, do this," or whatever, if you nagged him, you'd be called a nag. And they had dunking things. They would dunk their women in cold water for nagging them.
mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, come on. Like we've done some horrific things. And then the institutions, I think a lot of women got hurt. And I wonder about men who were going through their midlife crisis, if you will, and wanted a younger wife. And if the wife was going through her change of life and said, "That's it, I'm putting you in an institution," I bet you
Right.
they had the upper hand, right?
Right. And, I detail some of that in the book. I try not to get into some of the horrific things I read about in terms of the tortures that women went through. But, you mentioned hysterectomies, and there was this belief that the uterine was on fire. And so if they did hysterectomies for women in institutions, that would cure them, or they thought that would cure them. You mentioned dunking tanks, and that was a technique. They would put women who they thought again had hysteria in a little, almost like a wash tub or and then they would pour water, freezing cold water over their heads because they thought that their brains were on fire. And so if they cooled off their brains, they would be less hysterical.
Or shock them, the shock
Yeah.
therapy.
Right. Electroshock therapy came about a little bit
Mhm.
later, but they had all these other techniques. They used sleep therapy was another therapy where they would give them barbiturates and just have them sleep for days on end. And
Yep.
we've seen pictures of that, of,
Mhm.
people in institutions in the early part of the 20th century where they're just like zombies. Um,
That's interesting because when I think about, you know, all the women who were addicted to laudanum, I think they were kind of it's like the Valley of the Dolls. We're
yeah,
just going to numb you, and you
right.
just need to be a numb person so you don't see what's going on, and we'll just do what we want, right?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
Wow. Wow. So there's no equality back then, and we're still fighting it. So
right, right.
this is fun. This is a fun conversation.
Well,
The
I'm excited to
yeah.
say that this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, but that's okay. Mara does get out of the institution and does
So
take her
there's there,
power back.
yeah, because you can't stay there. Yeah, because I think that's the thing. We want some empowerment, but I think what's really great is that you have written this and brought it to light because there are still things going on in our world that, can repeat very quickly, as we can see right now. We're
Hmm.
really still having this upward battle, obviously. And so I think this is a very important topic to talk about. Where I'm recording this right now, I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, and around the corner was an institution where Zelda Fitzgerald was
Yes.
frequented quite a bit. And she actually put herself in the last time.
Yeah.
And she drank a lot. The two of them drank quite a bit and had, quite a relationship, but he had already passed away. And it was, at the end of her life, she died there in a fire. And, because she ran up the fire escape.
Hmm.
That's when they were doing the shock therapy. But there was
Right.
a fire in the kitchen and she was in the room next to it, the holding room. And she thought, okay, I'm going to, to escape. She ran up the fire escape, and the fire escape, the steps were wooden.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
she passed away, and they say you can, certain evenings, smell burnt hair.
Really. Wow.
Yeah, that's a kind of a story if you go through on one of the, ghost trolleys.
Yeah.
They'll tell you.
Part of my book is based in St. Paul. The scene is in St. Paul. And
Oh,
Zelda Fitzgerald was one of the inspirations for one of my characters. And
oh, cool.
yeah, so and some of her friends who were she had very interesting friends in
Oh,
real life. So yeah.
that's cool. Because that's the thing. You're supposed to be seen and not heard, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that there were nameless, like even in the records.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been able to, and then there's some, privacy laws that prevent you from finding out names,
Oh,
but I mean, we have a family plot that, or my family had a plot that had everyone buried in it, and she wasn't there. So I expect that's probably where she ended up, in the cemetery of the
wow.
unknown.
So you've been writing for a while too, as a writer, but what was it like writing a novel for you? Like just getting this one together?
Yeah, it was different.
And
I mean,
balancing it, how to balance all of this reality and fiction.
probably not very well at times. I was probably in the world of fiction too many times, my family might tell you, but I was an academic and a consultant, so I had done a lot of writing, but it was mostly nonfiction. And so when I decided to write this novel, I was like, well, what am I thinking? But I took a novel writing intensive class at the Loft Literary Center in Minneapolis and had a fabulous teacher and wonderful cohort of talented writers that gave me feedback, and I learned a lot from that. So, but I mean, it helped a lot to have the inspiration. I mean, it
Hmm.
was just, that trunk was there and is still there every day. I see it. It's in my house, and that was great inspiration. And I ended up probably I know I did 13 drafts of the book. So, I learned how to write as I
Wow.
went, but yeah, the balancing between the two, I just spend some time being in the character of each person, like, well, what would Rachel say about this? What would Mara say about that? Because part of the issue with writing two different characters between two, like, a century, is that you have to get the right tone so that when writers go from one chapter to another, even if you've labeled it what it is, like this is Rachel's chapter, they have to be able to feel that they're in a different time zone now. So
Mm.
I worked on that quite a bit, and also, like I said, had some great help and feedback from people.
That's a good, good thing to, because even going from nonfiction, I think nonfiction is really hard to write too, because you need to get people's attention. You know what I mean? So you've got that did that help you with writing this? Is, you know, nonfiction, you have to also get to the point, you know?
Right. Yeah, I probably had more trouble. I probably had more trouble. I probably would have had more trouble going the opposite direction when I think about it, going from fiction to writing nonfiction, because my nonfiction, my reports, my academic stuff, I always was tempted to put in a little bit of an editorial comment in
That's
it.
fun.
And I wrote some op-eds when I was younger. I mean, I was such a dork in junior high. I would go out with my friends and, we'd go to a dance or something. Then I'd come home and I'd sit at the dining room table and take out pen and paper and start writing like an op-ed about something I was having angst about. So, I've
Oh,
loved
that's
to
cool.
write. Writing is always something I've wanted to do, but this was a project of love. And my main goal was to bring Marit's life,
Mm,
reclaim her life, even if I had to do that in fiction. I
yeah.
wanted to do that.
Yeah, because she was voiceless
Right.
and
And
nameless, basically,
right.
too, you know?
Yeah. And now she's got
Yeah.
her name in a book. So yeah.
Yeah. And it gets people to understand history and in the important things of women's rights.
Right. Yep. There's quite a bit of that. The
Yeah.
book has some political slant to it, but it's not totally about that. It's more
Right.
about two really strong women who are
Hmm.
resilient and come to grips with
Nice.
the life that they've been given and what they can do to empower themselves and really
Mm.
make changes in their own lives.
Yeah, it's a really good point because, no matter what's going on in the world, which is always, the world is tumultuous, right? It's not as crazy as it was then. If you think about it, it's still not perfect. It's not idealistic as we want, but there is some progression being made. And, you've got to somehow go, okay, what do I have? That, and we take things for granted in such a fast society that to just sit back and realize, you know what? Oh, I can afford food. Well, then you're doing okay. You got,
Yeah.
are you seeing the sunrise in the morning? That's okay. Can you actually walk? We've got to take some of these real things that we have and build off of that to keep that spirit up. And I think sometimes, as women, with all the different issues, and gosh, I mean, let's pick every single person has something that is an injustice to them in some way, right?
Right.
um oh, I could give a group that isn't, but anyway, I won't go there. I'll behave. But there's a whole group and you all know what I'm talking about. So anyway, but we do have to find out where can we get even more empowered and resilient through whatever it is. We have to tap into that and not give up on things, not, like Willie Nelson said, his life turned around the day he started counting his blessings. And I
Hmm.
kind of feel that. And in writing, when you're dealing with such difficult things, it's important to have that empowerment and have hope in there, right? That's got to be
Right.
yeah. So are you going to do book clubs with this? Because I think it'd be such a good conversation for
I
people.
am, yes. And
Cool.
I'm going to put book club questions on my website so that book clubs can read it and answer those questions and address those
Oh, cool.
questions. So,
Are you going to
yeah.
tour with the book or you do it as a
I'm
Zoom
not
class,
sure
maybe?
yet.
Yeah.
I'm not sure yet. I'm trying to decide. I know that everybody says you should have a big book launch and I'm not quite there yet. So I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, but it's getting some attention, which is fabulous. And
Deservedly, yeah.
yeah, so we'll kind of see how this plays out. Like this is new for me, this whole process. So I kind of thought that once you got it published, you just sort of passed it off and then you were done. It's
Sorry.
not like that.
Mm-mm. No,
So,
I think you put more work into the marketing sometimes than you do writing it. It's
right.
like this whole other thing. And that's the hard part of it, but that's one of those, yeah, all those things have to be done. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
And
sorry.
there,
Yeah, people
there
don't
are
like that, but
a lot of different themes in there that I think people could use, like in a book club. There's certainly the theme
mhm.
around women, but there's also a theme around gender identity, which I think is
Yes,
an
yes.
important story to tell. And,
Uh-huh.
I had to be really careful when I was writing it because I'm not a trans person.
Mm,
And I didn't want to be co-opting a story that is someone else's. So I know some trans people and I talked to some and I talked to a married
mm,
couple and tried really hard. And then I, sort of had an ethical dilemma, do I put this in there or not? But I think that that story too is so important.
Mhm.
And it's such an important thing to be talking about and a story to be told, especially given, sort of the political climate right now around taking away
Mm.
rights. And um,
Yep.
people need to understand that we're talking about human beings here,
Well,
human
people would be
beings.
institutionalized for that too.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we're
One,
still trying to, change people's gender now. Like,
right.
hey, I want you to be this, and what you're doing is not. Anyway, yeah, it's it- the conversation is only beginning, it feels like,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yet people have been, fighting the good fight for years, but it's like as it's really starting to gain momentum in the good positive way, it's like here we are, we're going to take you down. And like, no, no.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
think when you read a book, I always say how it's such a personal experience to read a book, and no one can tell you right or wrong about your beliefs. When you're reading a book, it's not like you go to a movie with someone. I think the movies are powerful and you can have discussions, but there's a personal thing about a book that gives you time to chew on it for a while, and sometimes you reread it,
mhm,
and it stays in your head. The characters stay with you, right? And you start thinking from their perspectives, which can make positive change, but also help if you're going through something of the
right.
same nature, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's impossible I think it's impossible for anybody writing, even nonfiction, to not have your stamp in it. But the
Hmm.
same is true about a reader. Every single reader, the book is different for every single reader because you relate to different things. You see different, the characters differently. You might see the plot differently. So it's an individual experience for everyone.
Hmm.
And that's a great part about, reading books is that this
That's
is
awesome.
my private experience and nobody else is going to
Yeah.
have the same one that I have. So,
Yeah, and then the book clubs is cool because everybody read it. Now we're all on the same page and we can discuss things and maybe, have shed some light on things, maybe make
right.
positive changes too, or just like, wow, can you believe it? I mean, it is
Hmm.
good gossip. That is
Hmm.
writing is good gossip, isn't it? Especially when you go in history. I
Yep.
mean, it's all about gossip. So I
Hmm.
think this is very cool. Do you think you'd write another one?
I am. I'm planning to write
Oh,
another one if I ever get time to write another one. So, the next one probably will be based very loosely on my aunt, who was a WASP, Women's Air Corps,
wow.
in during World War II. So I wanted
Wow.
to kind of bring out that story a little bit more. There's some books out there about that, but not enough. And I'm sure you're familiar with The Women from Kristen Hanna,
Mhm.
writing about the women nurses in Vietnam. Same kind of idea to bring out, although I had the idea a long time ago. Same sort of thing to bring out. But what I try to do what I tried to do in this book, and I want to do in any future books I write, is that we all go through trauma, we all have drama, we all have challenges we have to deal with. And I hope that what the book portrays in my characters is that their 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 difficulties cause them to grow
Mhm.
and come out better on the other end of it. And so so the book, the Blue Trunk, it's a hopeful book. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a happy book. I didn't want to have a book that ended sad. So it's a happy ending, and both of the characters grow from the experiences they go through. Mark goes through some pretty harrowing experiences in the book, but I talked to a friend last night who was reading it for me, and she said, does it get better? And I said, yes, it gets better. So hang in
Well,
there if
but
you're reading it and feeling frustrated with it.
life is like that. You have to have the downer parts to have the uppers.
Right,
You have
right,
to, and you go through things. And I think that's where we have to have that connection of, it's not just me on my own. That's when people get really depressed and don't move forward as much, is if they feel so isolated.
right.
And I think like when you go back to the institutions, I mean, that's got to be isolating in a way, unless you're
Hmm.
connecting with the others. And if they're giving you drugs, if they're, torturing you, all those things, that's pretty isolating. And you have
Yeah,
strength from being alone, but it could go the other way.
right.
So, and books, that's why I say that's that empowerment. So how exciting, it's out now.
Yeah.
You've had your publishing day as this airs.
Hmm.
We'll be in a different city, but it'll be out. So it's very exciting. Everyone, if you go to annlowry.com, and that's Ann with no E and Lowry with no E, you can get it now from all your favorite places, and ask your bookshop to carry it too. Yes, and then that way you can support your local bookstore. And so it's good to have you on the show. I'm glad we could make this work.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, congratulations, everyone. Again, annlowry.com. The Blue Trunk is the book. Go get it. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.